The story of humanity's survival in the Ice Age begins with silence, so deep it is almost terrifying. Imagine standing at the edge of a white horizon where the sky itself seems swallowed by endless storms. The wind cuts like a blade across the face, sharp and merciless, carrying with it grains of snow that sting the skin and obscure all vision. For millions of years, this frozen stage dominated much of the earth, shaping the lives of every creature that dared to survive upon it. And among those creatures was one fragile, intelligent being, the early human. Against all odds, they carved their existence out of this unforgiving winter. The opening of our journey must place us there, not as modern observers wrapped in modern comforts, but as vulnerable cavemen, stepping barefoot into the longest night of the world. To survive in such an environment was never guaranteed. The Ice Age was not a single season, but an epic, stretching across tens of thousands of years, marked by cycles of glacial advance and retreat. Vast sheets of ice crawled across the continents, carving mountains, swallowing valleys, and altering the very climate of the earth. Winter stretched for months, even years, with scarce sunlight to warm the ground. Temperatures plummeted far below freezing, and food became so rare that survival itself felt like defying the will of nature. For early humans, every sunrise was a fragile victory, and every sunset carried the fear that they might not live to see the next dawn. The contrast that defined this world was stark. Death was always near, crouching in the cold shadows, waiting for the weak, the unprepared, or the unlucky. Yet life burned just as brightly in the determination of the human spirit. We must imagine a small family, huddled in a cave, their breath hanging in the frozen air like ghosts. Outside, the land is silent except for the distant rumble of glaciers or the eerie howl of wolves. Inside, a fire crackles, its orange glow fighting against the endless darkness. Around that fragile flame, warmth, hope, and survival come together in one circle of light. This was a theater of life in the Ice Age, a constant dance between warmth and cold, between safety and danger, between extinction and endurance. As we step further into this story, we must remember that humans were not the only actors upon this icy stage. Mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, cave lions, dire wolves, and saber-toothed cats prowled the frozen world, each playing its role in the balance of life. These animals were both threats and resources. To kill a mammoth was to feed a clan for weeks, yet to hunt one meant risking lives. To be stalked by wolves was terror. Yet sometimes wolves became partners, companions, ancestors of the dogs we know today. This constant interplay of danger and opportunity defined the daily rhythm of caveman existence. The environment itself was an enemy, more relentless than any predator. Snow buried the land in silence, making every step exhausting. Rivers froze solid, cutting off water sources, and driving animals to desperation. The wind stripped away heat and hope, forcing humans to wrap themselves in layers of animal hides and huddle together in tight circles. Nights could last 14 hours, where firelight was the only protection from the crushing blackness. The psychological toll was immense. To endure winter was not only a physical struggle, but also a mental battle against fear, despair, and hopelessness. Yet, despite all of this, the human story did not end in those icy shadows. It was shaped there, refined like steel and fire. Every invention, every social bond, every act of courage in the Ice Age became part of the foundation for modern humanity. It is within the context of winter's crushing weight that we find the roots of community, compassion, and ingenuity. The first sparks of controlled fire, the first clothing stitched with bone needles, the first shelters built from mammoth bones, all were born necessity in the coldest months. Winter forced humans to become more than animals of flesh. It forced them to become creatures of thought, cooperation, and adaptation. As our eyes wander across the endless snowfields of this ancient world, We must imagine what it felt like to walk there without modern boots, without insulated jackets, without heated homes. Every step was survival. The snow clung to bare skin, the cold burned through the lungs, and the air itself seemed designed to steal life away. And yet, within this cruel world, humans found beauty. The auroras dancing across frozen skies, the glittering silence of ice crystals in moonlight, the warm embrace of shared fire. These small wonders must have given hope to our ancestors, reminding them that life was worth the struggle. The opening of our story is therefore not just about the environment, but about the tension between fragility and endurance. Cavemen were vulnerable, yet they endured. They were hunted, yet they became hunters. They faced endless winters, yet they survived long enough to tell their stories in painted caves and whispered myths. The Ice Age was a world that could easily have destroyed us. Instead, it became the crucible that forged humanity. And so, as we pull aside the curtain of ice and step into their world, we begin a journey into the deepest test our species has ever faced. This is not merely a tale of cold winds and frozen rivers. It is a story of survival itself, told through firelight, through footprints in snow, through the silent determination of our ancestors who refused to be broken. It is here, in the frozen heart of the Ice Age, that the true story of humanity begins. The Ice Age was not simply cold weather. It was a complete reshaping of Earth's identity. Imagine towering glaciers stretching for hundreds of miles, grinding their way across continents, carving valleys, and leaving behind scars that we can still see today. Entire regions that are now fertile farmlands were once buried beneath walls of ice as tall as mountains. Oceans shrank as water froze into massive sheets, and coastlines expanded, revealing lands that connected what are now distant continents. It was a world locked in ice, and every creature that lived within it had to adapt or perish. For cavemen, this climate was not a passing inconvenience. It was a defining backdrop of their lives. Winters in the Ice Age were unlike any we know today. The temperature could plummet to levels that would freeze, expose flesh in minutes. The sun often gave little warmth, hanging weak and pale in the sky, obscured by endless clouds of snow. The night stretched long, swallowing entire days in darkness. In these conditions, survival was not just about gathering food. It was about resisting the very air one breathed. The cold was not an enemy that could be seen or fought with a weapon. It was an invisible killer that surrounded everything, pressing in against every cave wall, seeping into every layer of clothing, creeping into the bones of those who dared to rest. Food, already scarce in milder months, became almost impossible to find in winter. Plants withered beneath layers of frost, and forests that once held fruits and roots stood lifeless and bare. Herds of animals migrated or dwindled, leaving hunters to track prey across dangerous distances. Cavemen faced a world of emptiness where each hunt was uncertain and each failed attempt could mean starvation. Scarcity shaped their minds as much as it shaped their stomachs. Every scrap of marrow, every strip of fat, every frozen berry mattered. The challenge was not just the physical absence of food, but the psychological torment of hunger gnawing at their bodies night after night. Water, too, became a paradoxical threat. Surrounded by ice and snow, cavemen had to labor to melt it, often using precious firewood that was equally vital for warmth. Rivers froze solid, lakes disappeared beneath layers of ice, and the only way to drink was to bring ice to the fire and wait. But melting snow carried risks. Drinking it too cold could chill the body further, leading to hypothermia. Something as simple as a sip of water could become a life-or-death calculation. The very act of moving through the environment was a battle. Snowdrifts swallowed paths, and icy winds scoured the land with blinding force. For hunters, every step into the blizzard risked not only getting lost, but never returning. For families, the fear of separation in storms was constant. A child wandering even a few steps too far could vanish into the white abyss. The cold was not only physical but also disorienting, a silence broken only by the crunch of snow or the distant roar of shifting ice. Without landmarks, everything seemed the same, endless and hostile. Predators, too, were shaped by this climate. Winter drove them closer to human settlements, competing for the same scarce resources. Wolves prowled the edges of camps, drawn by the smell of meat. Cave lions and saber-toothed cats stalked the herds that humans also depended on. The ice-bound world became a battlefield where hunger forced every creature into desperate conflict. Humans were not at the top of this chain. They were simply one competitor among many, often weaker in strength but stronger in cunning. This constant rivalry added yet another layer to the challenges of winter. But perhaps the greatest enemy was time. Winter lasted not for weeks, but for months, stretching patience, resources, and endurance to the limit. Firewood had to be gathered in advance, food stored carefully, clothing repaired and reinforced. A single miscalculation, a forgotten stash, a failed hunt, a fire that went out, could doom an entire family. Planning became essential, and memory became a tool of survival. Elders carried the knowledge of which caves stayed dry, where animals migrated, when storms would come. In this way, winter forced humans into cooperation, binding families and clans together in shared struggle. Alone, one person could not endure. Together, there was a chance. The contrast of this climate was unrelenting. Abundance in the warmer seasons followed by desperate scarcity in winter. For cavemen, this rhythm was carved into their bones. The joy of summer hunts was always shadowed by the knowledge of winter's return. The laughter around fires in autumn was often haunted by preparation, drying meat, sewing furs, repairing weapons. Winter was a test that returned every year, demanding tribute from those who were not ready. It was not a single battle, but a cycle, a rhythm of nature that shaped the very evolution of humanity. And yet, within this merciless environment, humans found ways to adapt. They learned to read the skies, to track the winds, to prepare for storms before they arrived. They learned to work together, to share resources, to invent tools that lessened the burden of the cold. It was in the Ice Age that humans truly became problem solvers, turning fragility into resilience. Without the constant challenge of winter, perhaps this ingenuity would never have taken root. It was necessity, not comfort, that drove invention. As we stand in thought beside those ancient people, feeling the sting of icy wind and the endless hunger of winter, we begin to understand the magnitude of their achievement. They lived not in defiance of the climate, but within it, bending but not breaking, learning its patterns, exploiting its small mercies, and enduring its cruelty. Winter shaped them, sharpened them, and tested them in ways that echo through time. This was the Ice Age climate, a world at war with warmth, where every breath, every meal, every fire was a triumph stolen from the cold. It was the ultimate challenge, and it forged humanity into the survivor it would need to be. From this frozen crucible, our story continues. To the foods they ate, the hunts they risked, and the fragile strategies that turned desperation into endurance. When the Ice Age tightened its grip, food became the most urgent and relentless concern of every clan. Winter stripped the land bare, silencing the forest and locking the soil under a coffin of snow. Berries, roots, and edible plants disappeared. Rivers and lakes froze solid, trapping fish beneath walls of ice. Even the herds of animals that humans relied upon for meat often migrated far south, leaving behind empty tundras. For cavemen, each day of winter was shadowed by a question that haunted every waking moment. Where will the next meal come from? Hunger was not an occasional discomfort. It was a constant presence, a gnawing ache that hollowed the body and clouded the mind. The human body, fragile compared to the thick fur and fat of Ice Age beasts, needed warmth. And warmth required calories. To fight the cold, a person needed to consume more energy than in any other season. But in winter, energy was scarce. It was this paradox, needing more food in a time when food was least available, that defined the survival struggle of cavemen. The contrast was merciless: abundance in summer, starvation in winter. Many did not survive the lean months, and entire groups could be lost if preparations failed or hunting went wrong. In these conditions, nothing was wasted. The great hunts of autumn were followed by long nights of preservation. Strips of meat were dried and smoked. Fat was rendered into tallow, and bones were saved. Cavemen understood that marrow, hidden inside those bones, was rich with fat and nutrients. Even when flesh was gone, the skeleton of a kill could still feed the living. Bones became one of the last lines of defense against starvation, boiled into primitive broths that provided strength and warmth. This was not just cooking, it was survival alchemy, turning the remnants of death into sustenance for life. Imagine a family huddled inside a cave, the snowstorm raging outside. A pot, perhaps a crude container made from animal hide and lined with clay, hangs above the flames. Into it, bones are dropped, cracked open with stone hammers to release the marrow within. The water begins to steam, carrying with it the smell of fat and smoke. Around the fire, children wait, their eyes wide with hunger. The liquid that emerges is not a feast, but it is life, warm, oily, nourishing. It keeps their bodies burning against the cold, staving off weakness for another day. The taste of bone broth was perhaps the taste of survival itself. But even bones were precious. Hunters had to venture into frozen wastes to bring back meat, knowing that each failed expedition meant less to boil, less to chew, less to hope for. Winter hunting was a gamble where risk and reward were always uneven. Sometimes the kill was large, a bison or a reindeer, its body feeding a clan for weeks. Other times, the hunters returned empty-handed, their faces pale with exhaustion and their stomachs empty. In such moments, scavenging became as important as hunting. Cavemen trailed predators, waiting for wolves or lions to finish a kill before rushing in to claim what scraps remained. They learned to crack frozen bones left behind by other animals, extracting marrow that others overlooked. Nothing was beneath them when hunger ruled. Survival demanded humility. Fat, in particular, was gold. Unlike lean meat, which burned quickly, fat provided long-lasting fuel. Cavemen prized fatty cuts, brains, and marrow above all else. They learned to store it, wrapping it in hides and burying it beneath snow or in cold caves to preserve it through the months of famine. When even the fattest stores ran low, they turned to other desperate measures: chewing hides, scraping sinew, or boiling bones until every last nutrient was drawn out. These practices sound harsh to modern ears, but they were acts of genius, acts that stretched the thread of life just long enough for spring to return. The struggle for food shaped the rhythm of winter life. Days were measured not by hours, but by meals, or the absence of them. A successful hunt meant celebration, relief, and momentary safety. A failed hunt meant gnawing hunger, weakened bodies, and the grim knowledge that each passing day without food made survival less likely. The emotional weight of the struggle was immense. Hunger frayed tempers, exhausted energy, and cast a shadow over every decision. Yet it also bound groups together. Food was shared, not hoarded. A single marrow-filled bone could be passed among many mouths, each sip from the broth representing a shared pact of survival. Winter diets were not only meat. When luck or memory allowed, cavemen turned to caches of dried plants, frozen berries hidden under snow, or nuts stored from autumn. They dug beneath snow for roots, risking frostbite in the hope of finding something edible. They trapped small animals like hares or birds, supplementing the larger hunts. Every calorie mattered. Every bite counted. The ingenuity of this diet was its diversity, not in the modern sense of choice, but in the refusal to let any possible food source be ignored. The contrast of food and famine shaped their spiritual imagination as well. Some anthropologists believe that rituals around hunting and food, from cave paintings of animals to ceremonies around the fire, were born of this winter hunger. To pray for a successful hunt, to thank the spirits of the animals, to honor the bones of the dead mammoth. These acts may have been both belief and psychological necessity. In a world where hunger was constant, rituals gave meaning to meals, turning survival into something greater than desperation. And yet, hunger was not always defeated. Many winters ended in tragedy. Skeletons of Ice Age families have been found showing signs of starvation. Thin bones, teeth worn from gnawing on hides, malnourished children who did not live to see spring. For them, the broth was not enough, the bones not plentiful, the hunts not successful. This is the dark truth of winter diet. Sometimes it saved lives, sometimes it delayed the inevitable. But for those who endured, every broth simmered, every marrow bone cracked, every scrap of fat preserved was a step forward in the story of humanity. These acts of resourcefulness, born in desperation, became part of our collective inheritance. The human relationship with food, our obsession with cooking, flavor, preservation, may have its deepest roots in these long winters, where survival hinged on transforming the simplest scraps into nourishment. In the end, winter diet was not about feasting. It was about endurance. It was about finding life in what seemed lifeless, nourishment in what seemed empty. Bones, broth, scraps, and marrow, these became symbols of resilience. They remind us that humanity's survival was not built on abundance, but on the ability to endure scarcity, to stretch a single kill into many meals, to turn hunger into determination. The Ice Age forced humans to look at death, the carcass, the skeleton, the bone, and draw life from it. That is how cavemen ate in winter. That is how they endured. Winter in the Ice Age was a season of hunger, and hunger demanded the hunt. To survive, early humans were forced to leave the relative safety of their shelters and step into a world where the cold itself could kill as surely as a predator's claw. The snow-covered plains stretched endlessly before them, silent except for the groan of wind and the distant cries of animals. But within the stillness lay the promise of food: reindeer, bison, wild horses, and, on rare occasions, the towering mammoth. For the caveman, each animal was more than a meal. It was survival, clothing, tools, and fire. To track and kill in the frozen wilderness was not a choice. It was the most dangerous duty of winter life. The hunters moved slowly across the snow, their breath rising in visible clouds, their bodies wrapped in layers of hides and furs. They carried spears tipped with stone, knives made from bone, and a few tools designed to scrape, cut, and pierce. Their footprints marked fragile lines across the tundra, lines that could be erased in moments by wind or storm. To lose direction in such a landscape was deadly, but to return empty-handed was even worse. Behind them, families waited, stomachs aching, fires dwindling, eyes full of expectation. The hunters carried not only their weapons, but also the weight of their people's survival. Tracking prey in the snow required immense patience and skill. Every detail mattered. The indentation of hooves in frozen ground, the broken branch where an animal brushed past, the faint trail of droppings hardening in the cold. Hunters crouched low, studying signs, reading the language of the wilderness with practiced eyes. Snow made the world both easier and harder. Tracks were visible, yes, but storms could erase them in minutes. A trail followed too slowly could end in nothing but emptiness. A trail followed too quickly could drive the hunters straight into danger, a startled herd capable of trampling or scattering, a predator waiting to ambush the same quarry. Reindeer were among the most sought-after prey. Their herds moved in great numbers, and their bodies offered meat, hides, and antlers that could be carved into tools. But reindeer were swift and cautious, their senses sharpened by millennia of surviving predators. To approach them, Hunters had to work together, moving with silence, using the wind to mask their scent. They crept along ridges, crouched behind snowdrifts, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The contrast of stillness and sudden violence defined the hunt. For hours, there might be nothing but crawling and waiting. Then, in an instant, a spear was thrown, a herd erupted, and the hunters gave chase. Other prey, like bison or wild horses, carried even greater risk. These animals were larger, more powerful, and could defend themselves with horns and hooves. A single misstep could cost a hunter his life. Yet their meat was rich, and a successful kill could sustain an entire group for weeks. To face such beasts in winter was both terror and necessity. Hunters used strategy, sometimes driving herds into ravines or toward natural traps where escape was limited. Cooperation was essential. Alone, no human could bring down such prey, but together, using spears, coordination, and courage, they transformed weakness into strength. And then there was a mammoth, the giant of the Ice Age, both revered and feared. To hunt a mammoth in winter was an extraordinary event, undertaken rarely, and only when the rewards outweighed the dangers. Its size promised not just food, but also bones for shelter, tusks for tools, and fat for fuel. Yet, to face one was to risk everything. A mammoth in rage could crush a hunter beneath its feet or scatter an entire group. Some mammoth hunts ended in triumph, with feasts and firelight celebrations. Others ended in silence, in broken bodies left in the snow, in grief carried back to camp. The decision to hunt a mammoth was never taken lightly. But hunters were not alone in their pursuit. The winter landscape was crowded with rivals, each driven by hunger. Wolves often shadowed human hunting parties, waiting for the chance to steal a kill. Saber-toothed cats stalked the same herds, their fangs designed to pierce through thick hides. Even bears, emerging hungry from dens, posed threats to both prey and predator alike. Every hunt was a contest not only with the animal, but with the predators who claimed the same territory. To kill was not enough. The humans had to defend their prize, driving away wolves with fire and noise, standing in circles to ward off lions, or dragging meat quickly back to the safety of their camp. The cold added another cruel dimension. Fingers stiffened around spear shafts, breath froze in beards, and fatigue setting quickly as the body burned precious calories. A hunter who fell or became too weak could be lost to frostbite or hypothermia before help arrived. Returning with prey was never guaranteed. Sometimes hunters returned with nothing but exhaustion, their faces hollow, their spirits heavy with the knowledge that mouths at home would go unfed. Other times, they did not return at all, swallowed by storms, claimed by predators, or lying beneath the hooves of beasts. Winter hunting was as much about survival of the hunters themselves as it was about feeding their kin. And yet, when a hunt succeeded, the transformation was profound. The return of hunters dragging meat across the snow was met with relief, joy, and gratitude. Children ran to greet them. Elders raised their voices in thanks. Fires blazed brighter. The kill was not only sustenance, it was hope made tangible. Bones were cracked for marrow, fat rendered into fuel, hides stretched and prepared. Nothing was wasted. Around the fire, stories of the hunt were told and retold, each detail magnified, each danger remembered, each moment of courage praised. Hunting was not just about food. It was about identity, about proving humanity's place in the frozen world. Over time, these hunts shaped more than just survival. They forged bonds between men and women, between hunters and families, between clans themselves. Cooperation became instinct, strategy became culture, and courage became memory. The very act of hunting in winter taught early humans the importance of planning, patience, and working together. These were not only survival skills, they were the foundations of society. The shared risk, the shared reward, the shared hunger and relief, All bound people into communities that could endure more than individuals ever could. The contrast of the hunt was always clear. Life against death, hunger against nourishment, silence against chaos, fear against triumph. Each spear thrown was a gamble with fate. Each kill of victory pulled from the jaws of despair. Without these hunts, humanity would not have survived the winters of the Ice Age. With them, they not only endured but also learned the lessons that would carry them forward into the ages of civilization. And so, the image of the caveman hunter remains etched in our imagination, a figure trudging through snow, eyes fixed on distant prey, heart heavy with the weight of his people, yet burning with determination. He walks into the blinding cold not for glory, not for conquest, but for survival. His footsteps in the snow, fragile yet determined, mark the path of humanity itself. A path carved through hunger, risk, and the endless will to live. In the frozen heart of winter, when the sun dipped early below the horizon and the land turned into a wasteland of ice, fire was more than warmth. It was life itself. For early humans, the mastery of flame was a triumph greater than any hunt, greater even than the crafting of tools. Fire was protection. Fire was community. Fire was memory. Against the endless dark and bitter cold of Ice Age winters, it was the single force that transformed survival from a desperate struggle into a shared resilience. Imagine the world without fire. The night stretched on endlessly, the cold seeping into bones, the wind howling like a predator circling outside the shelter. In total darkness, fear grew. Every sound became a threat, every shadow a lurking danger. Without fire, there was no warmth to stave off freezing, no light to guide the night, no cooked food to nourish the body, no safety against the beasts that prowled the edges of camps. Without fire, humanity was small, fragile, and terribly exposed. With fire, everything changed. But fire was never guaranteed. It could not simply be conjured at will in those early days. It had to be found, nurtured, and guarded like the most precious of treasures. Sometimes lightning split the sky and ignited trees, leaving behind smoldering embers. Sometimes volcanic activity created natural flames. The earliest humans who discovered these burning gifts faced both terror and wonder. To approach fire was to approach danger, a force that burned flesh, devoured wood, and roared like a living creature. And yet, in its warmth and light, they saw salvation. To hold it, to keep it, was to possess something godlike. The act of maintaining fire in winter was a responsibility as sacred as hunting. In each group, someone was tasked with tending the embers, feeding them carefully, never letting them die. A lapse meant disaster. To lose fire in the middle of winter was calamity, forcing entire clans to risk their lives seeking another source. Embers were carried carefully in bundles of bark or hollow bones, wrapped in moss, kept alive through storms and migrations. The survival of fire was the survival of the people. In time, humans learned not only to keep fire but to create it. Sparks from striking stone against stone or friction from twisting wood against wood became methods of generation. The discovery of fire-making was revolutionary, though it required patience, skill, and practice. In winter, when materials were damp and winds relentless, starting a flame could take hours of effort. Hunters and gatherers huddled around small piles of tinder, breathing life into sparks, praying for smoke, then flame. When at last the fire caught, it was met with sighs of relief, laughter, sometimes even tears. The birth of flame was the rebirth of hope. Around the fire, life unfolded in ways otherwise impossible. It became the heart of community, the gathering point where warmth and light drove away fear. Families sat close together, sharing food, telling stories, and passing knowledge across generations. Fire extended the day beyond the limits of sunlight, allowing conversation, teaching, and planning to continue long into the night. It illuminated faces, casting flickering shadows against cave walls, shadows that dance like spirits in ritual. Firelight became a stage where myths were told and ancestors remembered, where rituals were performed and dreams shaped. Cooking over flame brought another leap forward. Raw meat, often dangerous with parasites or too tough to chew, was transformed into nourishment. Cooked food provided more energy, tasted better, and allowed humans to consume a wider variety of plants and animals. In winter, when every calorie mattered, cooking extended survival itself. Bone softened in fire released marrow, fat melted into vital fuel, and herbs or roots became edible when heated. Fire was not just warmth. It was a tool of transformation, turning the inedible into life-sustaining sustenance. But fire was not only physical, it was psychological. The blaze of flame comforted minds tormented by darkness. It provided a sense of safety against predators, for most beasts feared the glow and heat. Yet even more, it gave humans a sense of control over a world otherwise dominated by forces beyond their understanding. The flames became symbols of continuity in the chaos of winter, a steady light when all else was unstable. Around fire, fear loosened its grip. Around fire, songs were sung, laughter rose, and for a few moments, survival felt less like struggle and more like living. In many ways, fire was humanity's first true companion, as loyal as it was dangerous. It demanded care, consumed endlessly, and yet returned warmth, safety, and life. Hunters who left camp in darkness looked back to see its glow and felt courage. Children fell asleep to its crackle. Elders traced stories in its embers, and shamans gazed into flames to read visions and symbols. Fire was a mystery, a living force that connected humans to both earth and sky. Its smoke rose toward the heavens. Its heat sank into the soil. Its light banished shadows. To many it was divine. There were dangers, too. Fire could slip from control, consuming shelters, spreading into forests, turning safety into disaster. It was always a double-edged gift, a reminder that mastery was not absolute. Winter winds extinguish it. Snow could dampen it. Carelessness could squander it. To lose fire was to lose a battle against the season itself. The struggle to guard was constant, and every flame held through a storm felt like a victory of willpower over nature's cruelty. Over generations, fire became central not only to survival, but to identity. Its presence shaped migration patterns, settlement choices, and even social hierarchy. Those who could make fire were valued, often honored. Shamans and elders saw in fire a symbol of renewal and rebirth. In the heart of winter, fire was not just warmed against the cold. It was a ritual of hope, a daily act of defiance against death. The mastery of fire changed everything about humanity's relationship with the Ice Age world. It allowed expansion into harsher climates. It lengthened lives. It deepened community bonds. Without fire, winter might have been humanity's undoing. With fire, they endured, adapted, and thrived. So picture the scene. A small band of early humans huddled in a cave, the storm outside howling with fury. The cold presses in, relentless, merciless. But within, fire burns. Shadows dance on walls, meat roasts on sticks. Children doze in warmth, and elders whisper stories of spirits and ancestors. Outside is death, inside is life. That fragile line of flame, flickering yet steady, is all that separates one from the other. It is not just fire. It is the beating heart of humanity in the long, dark winter nights. When winter descended like a predator, clothing and shelter became the thin barriers between survival and death. For early humans who faced sub-zero nights and howling winds without the comfort of modern fabrics or heated homes, protection against the elements was an art of necessity, an innovation born out of desperation. Every stitch of hide, every bone awl, every mound of earth shaped into a dwelling was more than craftsmanship. It was survival embodied. Against the endless expanse of ice and snow, humans had to learn how to build warmth around their bodies and their families, crafting defenses from the very animals they hunted and the landscapes they traversed. Clothing was humanity's second skin. In the absence of fur that other creatures grew naturally, humans turned to hides of the animals they pursued. The mammoth, bison, reindeer, and even smaller creatures like rabbits or foxes became living resources not only for food but for warmth. After the kill, the work was far from done. Skins had to be carefully scraped, stretched, and softened, otherwise they stiffened into useless slabs of leather. Women and men labored side by side, chewing hides to soften them, rubbing them with fat, smoking them over low fires to preserve flexibility. These were not luxuries. They were tasks of survival, repeated with each hunt. From these hides came cloaks, leggings, boots, and hoods. Animal tendons dried and split into sinew threads, became stitching material. Bone awls and needles, some of the oldest tools ever found, testified to the ingenuity of Ice Age people. With them, hides were sewn tightly to keep out the biting winds. Clothing was layered, fur turned inward to trap heat, sometimes outward for additional coverage. Boots were stuffed with grasses to insulate feet from frozen ground. In some regions, cloaks were even fringed with strips of fur to deflect snow and wind, making the wearer not only warmer, but more resistant to the merciless storms. But clothing alone could not save them from the long nights of winter. Shelter was equally vital. The earth itself became a fortress. In caves, humans found natural protection, yet caves were often damp, dark, and shared with predators. Those who could not find caves turned to ingenuity. They raised structures from wood, bone, and hide, crafting tents and huts that withstood the bitter season. The mammoth, in particular, provided more than meat and hide. Its massive bones, tusks, and skulls became frameworks for dwellings. Archaeological finds reveal rings of mammoth bones arranged like walls, covered with hides and insulated with moss, grass, and snow. These were not just shelters. They were monuments to survival, a merging of human skill and natural resource. Inside these dwellings, families huddled close. Fire crackled at the center, and smoke curled through holes in the roof. The air was heavy with the scent of cooked meat, smoke, and animal hides. Within those cramped walls, humans built warmth not only with fire, but with closeness. They pressed together under furs, shared body heat, and formed bonds that went beyond kinship. Shelter was not just protection against the cold. It was the architecture of community. The contrast between inside and outside was dramatic. Step into the storm, and the wind cut like knives. The snow burned against skin, and every breath threatened to freeze lungs. Return inside, and warmth, light, and companionship embraced you. The threshold between outside and inside became almost symbolic, a passage between death and life, isolation and belonging. To lose one's shelter was to be cast into the jaws of winter. To secure one was to claim a fragile piece of safety in a merciless world. Over time, the design of shelters grew more refined. Some groups built semi-subterranean homes, digging into the earth and covering the openings with hides and branches. The ground offered insulation, stabilizing temperatures. Others constructed conical tents of wood and hide, ancestors of the teepee, which could be disassembled and carried during migration. Snow itself, once seen as an enemy, became an ally. In certain regions, people learned to build snow walls and domes that trap heat, a practice echoed thousands of years later in the igloos of Arctic peoples. These innovations show not only human adaptability, but the creativity sparked by necessity. Clothing and shelter also carried symbolic and social weight. The finest furs marked skillful hunters. The best crafted garments reflected both status and care. Mothers dressed their children in multiple layers, wrapping them as though against death itself, each knot and stitch a silent prayer. Shelter construction was communal, requiring cooperation, planning, and trust. To build together was to affirm unity, to recognize that no one survived winter alone. The psychological comfort of clothing and shelter cannot be underestimated. Wrapped in hides, people felt less vulnerable, less exposed to the pitiless winter. Beneath a roof of bone and hide, they could close their eyes and imagine safety. These were not just practical defenses. They were psychological sanctuaries. In the heart of winter, when everything outside screamed danger, the human-made barrier against the cold gave a fragile but crucial sense of control. Yet, even these defenses were never permanent. Garments wore thin, hides stiffened and cracked. Shelters collapsed under storms. Constant repair was needed. Children learned early how to twist sinew, pierce hide, patch roofs, and replace insulation. The struggle was relentless. Every day, the environment demanded proof of resilience, and every day, humans answered by patching, rebuilding, and reshaping. Still, clothing and shelter did more than guard against death. They allowed early humans to dream of life beyond mere survival. With warmth secured, they had time for ritual, story, and reflection. They painted the walls of caves that sheltered them, draped decorated hides, and adorned garments with beads and carved bone. In these small acts, practical necessity blossomed into culture. Clothing and shelter, at first tools of survival, became expressions of identity and humanity. So let's imagine one night. Outside, the blizzard screams, snow piling against the mammoth bone walls. The cold presses in, relentless and merciless. But inside, beneath layers of hides, a family gathers. Children laugh near the fire. Elders mend garments with bone needles. Hunters lean spears against the wall. The storm may rage, but within the shelter is warmth, safety, and life. In that fragile bubble of protection, humans endure. And in enduring, they transform winter's cruelty into a stage for resilience. In the depths of winter, when the land was buried beneath thick layers of snow and prey grew scarce, hunting became both a lifeline and a gamble. Every expedition into the frozen wilderness was a confrontation with uncertainty, a test not only of skill and endurance, but of courage itself. For early humans, survival in the Ice Age was not simply about chasing animals. It was about outsmarting them, adapting to their movements, and enduring the brutal cold while carrying tools no more advanced than sharpened stone, bone-tipped spears, and sheer determination. Snow altered everything. In warmer seasons, hunters could track animals across soft soil or forest floors, but in winter the world became a shifting landscape of white, where tracks disappeared quickly under storms and scents froze in the air. Yet, the snow also revealed clues. Fresh prints pressed into its surface betrayed the direction of herds. Blood stains from a wounded animal stood out starkly against the white. Hunters learned to read the snow like a book, interpreting every indentation, every broken branch, every scatter of caught-on bark. To fail in reading these signs was to return empty-handed or not return at all. The prey itself was formidable. Mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, and bison were massive, dangerous animals. Reindeer, horses, and smaller game like hares were swifter, harder to corner. In winter, many of these animals migrated in search of food, forcing humans to follow them across vast distances. These journeys were grueling. Snow-clogged paths, rivers froze, and icy winds battered hunters until their faces burned raw. But hunger was a ruthless motivator. Families huddled in shelters, waiting for hunters to return with meat, and failure meant starvation. Hunting was rarely a solitary act. Winter demanded cooperation. Bands of hunters spread out across the snow, driving animals toward traps, cliffs, or ambush points. Communication was wordless, carried by gestures, whistles, or simple intuition formed through years of practice together. Spears were hurled in coordinated volleys, each strike a desperate attempt to wound the beast before it could charge or escape. The dangers were immense. A single misstep against a mammoth or bison, could mean being trampled, gored, or frozen on the ground while companions carried on. Every hunt balanced between triumph and tragedy. To increase their chances, humans crafted ingenious methods of trapping. They dug pits in frozen ground, camouflaged with branches and snow, luring animals into sudden death. They drove herds toward natural features, cliffs, ravines, or icy lakes, where the animal's size became their downfall. Smaller prey was caught with snares woven from sinew or traps baited with scarce food. Each method required foresight, patience, and teamwork. To trap was to think like the animal, to anticipate its steps before they were taken. Still, the cold was a hunter's greatest adversary. Standing for hours in snow drained strength, numbed fingers, and froze breath into frost. Spears had to be gripped with stiff hands. Eyes had to remain sharp against stinging winds. Hunters layered hides and furs. Yet even then, exhaustion set in quickly. Hunger gnawed at them as they sought to feed others, creating a cruel paradox. The weaker they grew, the harder it became to secure the food that would make them strong again. The line between predator and prey blurred, for winter threatened to consume humans as mercilessly as it did the beasts they pursued. But there was triumph in success. The moment when a spear found its mark, when a mammoth roared and staggered, when blood steamed against the snow. It was a victory that reverberated through the entire clan. The hunt was not just about nourishment. It was about survival achieved through courage and unity. The carcass of a kill was stripped with precision. Meat carved into portions, fat carefully stored, bones cracked open for marrow, hides prepared for clothing and shelter. Nothing was wasted. Each part of the animal represented more than sustenance. It was security against the cold. The psychological weight of hunting in winter was immense. Every departure into the snow carried the knowledge that not all might return. Families watched their hunters leave with heavy eyes, praying to unseen spirits, whispering rituals, or touching talisman for luck. When hunters returned victorious, the camp erupted in relief and celebration. Fire crackled higher, songs were sung, and food was shared widely. For a moment, winter's grip loosened. But when hunters failed, when they came back empty-handed or not at all, silence fell heavy and fear grew sharper. Over time, these hunts shaped more than survival. They shaped culture, belief, and identity. Myths were born around great hunts. Stories passed from elders to children by firelight. Animals were not merely prey. They were spirits, forces of nature, beings to be respected and sometimes feared. Many groups practiced rituals before and after hunts. Offerings of bone or meat, gestures of thanks to the fallen creature. Dances meant to honor its spirit. Hunting was never just physical. It was spiritual, a bond between human and animal written in the snow and sealed in blood. In winter, the contrast between abundance and scarcity was never clearer. A successful hunt meant full bellies, warmth, laughter, and renewed strength. A failed one meant hollow eyes, restless nights, and a gnawing ache of hunger that weakened bodies and spirits alike. This sharp contrast was a rhythm of Ice Age life, a cycle that defined every season but became most intense in the unforgiving cold. Imagine one such hunt. The sky gray and heavy with snow, the ground crunching beneath feet wrapped in fur. A group of hunters moved silently, spears clutched tight, eyes fixed on a distant herd of reindeer. Breath steams in the frigid air, hearts beat fast. With a sudden shout, they break into a run, driving the herd toward a ravine. The snow churns as animals panic, hooves thunder and spears fly. One stag stumbles, pierced by stone and bone. The hunters rush forward, finishing the kill. Triumph erupts in ragged cries. Tonight, there will be meat. Tonight, families will eat. For one more day, winter has been defeated. The struggle and the victory of hunting in snow reveal the essence of Ice Age humanity, fragile against nature's cruelty, yet endlessly resilient. They were not the strongest creatures of their world, nor the fastest. But they endured because they learned, cooperated, and dared to face the frozen wilderness armed with nothing more than their wits, their courage, and sharpened stone. Hunting in winter was never easy, but it was a crucible in which human endurance was forged. For early humans, survival in the frozen grip of winter was never sustained by hunting alone. The hunt brought triumph, but also risk and uncertainty. Even the most skilled hunters could return empty-handed, and herds often migrated beyond reach when the cold deepened. To endure the season when nature seemed most hostile, people turned to quieter, often overlooked sources of sustenance. The hidden roots beneath frozen soil, the withered remnants of berries preserved from autumn, and ingenious methods of storing food against the hunger of long nights. Hunting was the drama of survival. Gathering and storing were its quiet insurance. Roots and tubers buried beneath snow and hardened earth became treasures of those who knew where to dig. Women, children, and elders often took part in these searches, scraping at frozen ground with sticks or bone tools, seeking starchy lifelines like cattail rhizomes or wild parsnips. Though meager compared to meat of mammoth or reindeer, these roots carried vital calories, often boiled into stews that thickened the belly and stretched supplies. In a world where fire turned raw into edible, roots became not only fuel for body but warmth for spirit. Simmered alongside bits of dried meat or marrow bones into broth that could sustain family for days. Berries, too, played their part. In autumn, as forests and tundras briefly offered abundance, groups gathered them in bulk, cranberries, bilberries, and lingonberries, drying in the sun or smoking them over low fires. Once dried, berries hardened into tough morsels, tart but enduring. In the depths of winter, when snow covered the land in silence, a handful of these dried fruits could taste a memory of warmth, a whisper of summer's generosity. Children sucked on them slowly, savoring both flavor and comfort, while adults mixed them into stews for added energy and variety. Nuts and seeds provided another lifeline, though often scarce. Cracked with stones or roasted in fire, they delivered fats essential for enduring cold. The act of cracking open a frozen walnut or pine cone by the fire was more than food gathering. It was an act of defiance against hunger. Each small store of nuts represented forethought, the planning of past seasons when hands had gathered more than immediate need. For winter was never kind to those who thought only of the present. Storage itself became a form of survival technology. Meat from successful hunts could not always be consumed at once, and without preservation it would spoil. But in the Ice Age winter, the land itself became a freezer. Hunters learned to store meat beneath snowbanks, where cold preserved it naturally. Frozen rivers and lakes became natural larders, slabs of meat sunk beneath ice and marked for retrieval later. Caves, too, doubled as storage, their cool interiors extending the life of dried fish, smoked meat, or marrow-filled bones. This careful preservation meant that a single hunt could sustain families for weeks, turning fleeting abundance into long-lasting survival. Drying was among the earliest and most effective techniques. Thin strips of meat, hung near fire or in cold wind, lost moisture and became tough but durable. Smoked over smoldering wood, meat acquired not only preservation but flavor, a richness that brightened otherwise monotonous diets. Some groups pounded dried meat into powder, mixing it with rendered fat and berries, an ancient form of high-energy rations known much later as pemmican. This mixture could last for months, carried through migrations and eaten in times of scarcity. In its humble form, it was a miracle of foresight, a portable answer to hunger when all else failed. Bones themselves became hidden treasures. Split open with stone hammers, marrow inside provided dense, fatty nourishment that could revive weary hunters or strengthen starving children. In times of true desperation, bones were boiled repeatedly, even when stripped bare, until broth rich in minerals seeped from them. This was survival stripped to its essence, taking what little remained and extracting every possible ounce of life from it. Around such broths, families sat quietly, sipping warmth in silence, grateful for what remained. But food was never just about nutrition. It was about security, hope, and ritual. The act of storing food carried with it a kind of faith in the future, the belief that there would be a tomorrow to feed. To hide meat beneath snow, to dry berries for winter, to hang strips of meat in smoke was to say, we will live through this. Food became not just sustenance, but a promise to endure. Yet scarcity was relentless. There were winters when stores ran low, when traps yielded little and hunters failed. In those times, desperation pushed humans to the edge of endurance. Some turned to scavenging, following wolves or other predators to steal remains. Others gnawed bones long since stripped, cracked them open again in hope of finding marrow hidden deep. Bark, lichens, and inedible roots were sometimes boiled in futile attempts to quiet hunger. Starvation was not rare, and the line between life and death often narrowed to the smallest stored dried berries, the last strip of smoked meat, or the hidden root dug from beneath a snowbank. Despite these hardships, food gathering and storage created bonds within the group. Women who gathered and stored berries ensured survival, just as hunters did with their spears. Elders who remembered where roots could be found beneath snow guided the young. Children helped to dry meat, crack nuts, or carry stores to hiding places. Food was never an individual matter. It was collective, woven into the fabric of community. To share food was to affirm belonging. To eat together was to reinforce unity against the cold. Even the act of eating carried psychological power. To chew on dried fruit by the fire was to remember summer. To sip broth made from bones was to taste resilience. To gnaw dried meat was to affirm survival. These simple foods carried symbolism beyond their calories. They represented continuity, the bridge between past hunts, past seasons, and future survival. Imagine one evening. Outside, snow falls thick and heavy, the wind sweeping across an endless frozen plain. Inside the shelter, firelight flickers against mammoth bones and hides. A mother stirs a pot of broth, dropping in dried berries and bits of marrow. Children wait with wide eyes, clutching strips of dried meat in their small hands. An elder cracks a frozen bone, sucking marrow with quiet satisfaction. The meal is simple, meager, even, but in that moment, it is everything. It is warmth. It is nourishment. It is life. Winter demanded more than strength. It demanded foresight, cooperation, and creativity. Food beyond the hunt, the roots, berries, storage pits, and bone broths, was the unseen foundation of survival. Hunting may have written the legends of Ice Age life, but gathering and storing wrote its continuity. In the silence of winter nights, it was these quiet practices, as much as the roar of a mammoth hunt, that carried humanity forward. To survive the brutal winters of the Ice Age, humans were never truly alone. The frozen plains, icy forests, and wind-swept tundras were shared with a host of creatures, some mighty prey, others cunning predators, and still others rivals in the eternal competition for survival. Every footprint in the snow carried meaning. Every shadow in the distance could signal either food or danger. Animals were both lifeline and threat, partners in the great struggle of existence, and reminders that humanity was only one species among many fighting to endure the cold. The vast herds of prey animals formed the foundation of survival. Mammoths, towering and shaggy, lumber across the steppe in search of grass buried beneath frost. Their tusks curved like crescent moons, their size both blessing and curse to the hunters who dared challenge them. A single mammoth could feed a band for weeks, providing meat, fat, bone, and hide, but the risk was immense. To face a creature many times larger than oneself demanded not just courage, but careful planning, teamwork, and no small measure desperation. When successful, however, the rewards were unmatched. Mammoth ribs that could be used to frame shelters, hides thick enough to resist the coldest winds, and bones that burned slow and hot when fuel was scarce. Alongside mammoths roamed woolly rhinoceroses, massive beasts armored with shaggy coats and long horns. Though formidable and dangerous, they too became prey under certain circumstances, often when weakened by age, sickness, or deep snow. Hunters approached such animals with caution, using spears tipped with flint and working in coordinated groups to avoid fatal charges. A woolly rhino's meat and hide were precious, but hunting one was a gamble with death. More accessible prey came in the form of reindeer and wild horses. These herds moved constantly, driven by instinct to find food beneath the snow. For hunters, reindeer were lifelines, providing not only meat but hides for clothing and sinew for bowstrings. Reindeer migrations shaped human movements, forcing bands to follow the herds across vast distances. In these migrations, the rhythm of survival was written: the chase, the kill, the feast, and the storage for winter's lean months. Horses, though swift and wary, also fell to organize hunts, their flesh sustaining hungry families, and their hides serving as coverings against the cold. But the landscape was never just filled with prey. Predators stalked it too, fierce and unrelenting, rivals for both food and life. Wolves move in packs, their howls echoing across the tundra at night. Sometimes they were competitors, stealing from kills and shadowing hunters in hope of scraps. At other times, they became teachers, showing humans how to hunt as a pack, how to pursue prey with persistence. Over generations, wolves and humans would grow closer, an alliance that reshaped both species. But in the Ice Age winter, they were often still adversaries, dangerous if threatened, relentless if hunger drove them. Even more fearsome were the great cats of the Ice Age. The cave lion, larger than any lion alive today, prowled the open plains, its strength enough to bring down prey that even humans hesitated to approach. Encounters with cave lions were dangerous affairs, with hunters needing fire and numbers to drive them away. In forested regions, saber-toothed cats lurked, their long fangs gleaming in firelight. These predators struck with precision, targeting young or weak animals, and sometimes unwary humans. To hear the growl of such a beast in the dark was to know that one's place in the food chain was never secure. Other predators haunted the cold as well. Hyenas, cunning and organized, bears, immense and unpredictable, and wolverines, small yet ferocious. Each threatened humans not only directly but also indirectly, competing for carcasses and food stores. A band that left meat poorly hidden might return to find it stolen. Survival gambled away to sharper teeth and stronger jaws. Yet not all animals were strictly threats or prey. Some existed in a strange in-between role, shaping human lives in quieter ways. Birds, for instance, became indicators of seasons and migrations, their flight paths hinting at the movements of prey herds. Small game like hares and ptarmigans offered quick, reliable meals, often caught with snares or simple traps. Fish beneath icy rivers, caught through holes broken in the ice, provided vital protein when hunts failed. These lesser creatures rarely inspired myths or legends, but they filled the belly when larger hunts faltered, proving that survival was built as much on the small as on the grand. The presence of these animals also shaped human imagination. To early people, predators were not merely beasts but symbols, embodiments of strength, cunning, or danger. Caves bear witness to this, walls adorned with painted mammoths, lions, and reindeer. These animals lived not only outside in the frozen landscape, but also inside human thought, spirit, and ritual. To paint a mammoth might have been to honor the hunt, to ensure its success, or to call upon its power. To carve the image of a lion was to acknowledge a rival, to capture its strength in stone. Winter sharpened these relationships. Scarcity brought predators and humans into direct conflict more often, both driven to desperation by hunger. Wolves fought for carcasses humans had slain. Lions prowled near camps, drawn by the smell of stored meat. Hyenas followed trails of blood through snow. At such times, Survival became not only about killing prey, but about defending the kill from other hungry mouths. A hunt was never truly over until the food was secured, hidden, and guarded. The rivalry extended further into the domain of strategy itself. Just as wolves learned to shadow human hunters, humans learned to adapt to the strategies of predators. Fires were set at camp edges to deter prowling cats. Noise and shouting drove off scavengers. Spears were always kept ready, even at night. In this way, humans lived not apart from the animal world, but fully within it. Not rulers, but participants in the eternal cycle of predator and prey. Picture one such night. A band of hunters drags home strips of reindeer meat, their breath steaming in the freezing air. Behind them, distant howls rise, the wolves already on the trail. Fire is stoked higher, spears laid across laps, eyes scanning the dark. The meat is both salvation and peril, promising nourishment but attracting danger. Around the fire, children huddle close, while outside the circle of light, eyes gleam in the snow. In moments like these, humans knew with clarity that survival was not guaranteed. It was earned night by night, through vigilance and unity. Ultimately, the animals of winter were mirrors to humanity itself. The mammoth embodied endurance, the lion raw power, the wolf cooperation and cunning. By hunting, watching, and sometimes fearing them, humans came to understand their own place in nature. They were not alone, not dominant, but part of a greater struggle that bound all living things to the frozen earth. And so, survival was never simply about killing or avoiding animals. It was about learning from them, competing with them, and in some cases, forming bonds that would change the course of history. The animals of the Ice Age winter were rivals, prey, and predators, but also teachers, inspirations, and companions in the shared fight against the cold. Without them, humanity could not have endured. With them, life was a constant reminder that survival meant more than strength. It meant adaptation, respect, and the recognition that in winter, every creature fought the same battle. If shelter was the first line of defense against the winter cold, clothing was the second, a shield carried on the body, one that never left, even when moving across icy plains or crouching in the shadows of a cave. For prehistoric humans, survival meant more than building fires and finding food. It meant mastering the art of turning animal remains into garments that could preserve body heat, resist the wind, and keep fragile skin from freezing in the merciless cold. Without clothing, the Ice Age was not survivable. With it, even the deadliest winters could be endured. The process began with the hunt. Every animal that fell was more than just meat. Its skin, fur, sinew, and bones became resources essential to life. Hunters and gatherers learned to strip hides with care, cutting away fat and flesh, rolling the skins to carry them home. A mammoth provided vast sheets of hide, thick and unwieldy, best used for tent coverings and heavy cloaks. Reindeer and deer offered lighter skins, supple and ideal for layered garments. Wolves and foxes, with their dense winter pelts, became hoods, mittens, and decorative trims. Nothing went to waste. Every creature taken in the struggle for survival gave its warmth to those who claimed it. But a fresh hide was heavy, wet, and stiff. It could not be worn as it was. To transform skin into clothing required knowledge, patience, and skilled hands. The first step was cleaning, scraping away fat and flesh with stone blades until the skin was thin and workable. Women often took on this task, their persistence turning raw material into usable leather. Smoke and animal brains became natural softeners. Brains rich in oils were mashed and rubbed into hides, loosening fibers and making them pliable. Smoking the hides by suspending them above a smoldering fire not only softened them, but also preserved them, protecting against rot and insects. The result was leather, tough, durable, resistant to the elements. Yet leather alone was not enough in the depths of winter. Furs with their insulating layers, with a true armor of Ice Age survival. These were often worn with the fur turned inward to trap body heat or outward to resist wind and snow. Cleverly, prehistoric people layered garments, understanding instinctively what modern science now confirms, that trapped air between layers creates warmth. Multiple hides could be tied or stitched together, forming coats, leggings, and boots. But hides and furs, though vital, required assembly. It is here that one of humanity's quietest yet most revolutionary inventions entered the story: the bone needle. Fashioned from the splinters of long bones, sharpened at one end and pierced with a hole at the other, bone needles transformed survival. With them, clothing was no longer bound by crude knots and ties. Instead, hides could be sewn together with sinew thread, creating garments that fit the body, wrapped it tightly, and allowed movement even in layers. This innovation was as powerful as fire itself, for it expanded the range of climates humans could endure. A well-sewn hide coat could mean the difference between life and death in a snowstorm. Archaeological finds bear witness to this silent revolution. From sites in Siberia to caves in France, bone needles as small and delicate as modern ones have been uncovered, some dating back more than 30,000 years. Their presence tells us that Ice Age humans were not draped in crude animal skins like caricatures suggest. Instead, they crafted tailored clothing, boots, leggings, tunics, and hoods designed to protect every inch of the body. These garments were layered intelligently, much like modern explorers layer synthetic fabrics. The ingenuity is breathtaking, not primitive, but adaptive and advanced. Consider the boots. In a frozen world, feet were especially vulnerable, easily numbed by snow and ice. Prehistoric boots were made by layering fur inside, leather outside, and sinew bindings around ankles to keep out the cold. Mittens were similarly fashioned, sometimes with fur turned inward, sometimes with overlapping flaps to allow use of fingers when needed. Hoods and cloaks were critical, as much heat is lost to the head and shoulders. Some garments were decorated with beads or dyed with natural pigments, blending necessity with expression, turning survival into art. These clothes were not just physical shields. They carried symbolic weight. To wear the fur of a wolf was to carry its spirit, its strength and cunning. To cloak oneself in mammoth hide was to embody endurance. Clothing became an extension of identity, a way to connect with animals not only as food, but as companions in the struggle for life. Rituals may have been tied to the donning of new garments, especially for children or hunters embarking on dangerous journeys. In this way, the act of wearing fur was more than practical. It was spiritual, a bridge between human fragility and the resilience of the wild. Children grew up learning these skills by watching their elders. A young girl might begin by helping scrape hides, a boy by twisting sinew into thread. Over time, both would master the careful stitches that held garments together. In this, clothing making was a communal act, one that bound the group together, around fires in caves or shelters. Stories might be told while hides were scraped, jokes shared while threads were pulled tight. In the coldest nights, the very act of preparing clothes became an act of hope, a promise that tomorrow the group would still endure. But winter tested even the best-made garments. Wet hides froze stiff, requiring thawing and re-softening by the fire. Snow clung to fur, soaking through if not carefully dried. Maintenance was constant, sewing holes, patching tears, reshaping stretched leather. Survival depended not just on crafting clothing, but on caring for it. A hunter who neglected boots might find toes blackened with frostbite. A tear in a cloak could mean shivering through the night. One could imagine a typical scene. In a smoky shelter, a woman leans close to firelight, needle in hand. Sinew threads stretch taut as she patches her partner's leggings. Children play nearby, wrapped in oversized fur cloaks. Outside, the wind howls, rattling the shelter, but inside the rhythm of stitches brings a measure of calm. Each stitch is more than thread through hide. It is life secured, warmed, ensured, survival woven by hand. Clothing also enabled migration. Without garments suited for extreme cold, humans could never have ventured into northern Europe, Siberia, or eventually across the Bering Land Bridge into the Americas. Clothes extended human territory, turning once deadly lands into habitable ones. In this sense, fur and leather were not merely responses to cold but tools of expansion, as significant as fire, tools, or weapons. They allowed humanity to spread, adapt, and endure. And just as important, clothing provided comfort and even beauty. Beads carved from bone or shells were sewn into hides, not for warmth but for expression. Dyes from plants and minerals were smeared onto garments bright against the whiteness of snow. Even in survival, there was a human urge to decorate, to transform necessity into culture. Clothing was both shield and canvas, protection and proclamation of identity. In the frozen world of the Ice Age, to be naked was to die. To be clothed was to live, to hunt, to move, to dream. Hides, furs, sinews, and bone needles together wove the fabric of survival. They wrapped fragile bodies in the warmth of the animals they hunted, blurring the line between human and beast. Each garment carried a story, of the hunt that brought it, the hands that stitched it, the body it warmed. And so, clothing became humanity's quiet triumph over winter. Fires could flicker and shelters could falter, but a cloak, a hood, a pair of boots followed everywhere, a portable refuge, a cocoon of warmth against a merciless sky. More than tools, more than weapons, clothing was the intimate barrier that allowed fragile flesh to endure the Ice Age, stitch by stitch, hide by hide, life by life. When we imagine the life of Ice Age humans, it is often the great hunts that dominate our minds. Spears thrust into mammoths, packs of hunters circling reindeer, blood steaming in the snow. Yet survival in winter was not only written in hunts and kills. Food did not always come on four legs. Beneath the frozen ground, hidden in caches, tucked in baskets and skins, lay the other side of nourishment. Roots, nuts, berries, and plants gathered and preserved with foresight. Without these quieter, less dramatic foods, even the greatest hunters would have perished, for meat alone could not sustain the body through the long months of cold. The story begins in warmer seasons, during spring and summer, when the world thawed and rivers sang with life. Women, children, and elders scoured the land for edible plants. Every root, nut, and seed gathered then was a promise for winter. Baskets woven from reeds were filled with hazelnuts, acorns, and walnuts, their shells nature's perfect storage vessels. Tubers and roots were dug carefully from the earth. Some roasted immediately, others dried for later. Berries were eaten fresh in summer, but also preserved by drying, strung on sinew like beads, or mashed into cakes that hardened in the sun. These efforts were not supplementary luxuries. They were the insurance policy of survival. As the cold descended and snow buried the landscape, these stores became treasures. The crunch of a hazelnut, the sweetness of a dried berry, the dense energy of a roasted root. Such things were as vital as mammoth meat. Nuts in particular were lifelines, their oils and fats sustaining energy when hunts failed. Unlike fresh meat, they could be stored without rotting, hidden in pits or tucked into leather pouches, waiting for the day when hunger gnawed hardest. Roots and tubers demanded more effort. Even in winter, when the ground was hard with frost, determined hands could dig beneath snow to reach buried stores of starchy nourishment. Plants like cattail roots, rich in carbohydrates, were dug from frozen marsh edges, often with stone tools to break through the ice. Bitter roots might be boiled in broth to soften their flavor, turning what seemed inedible into sustenance. The knowledge of which plants could be eaten and which would kill was passed from generation to generation, each mistake carved into memory by the cost of poisoning. In this way, food was also knowledge, survival etched into the collective memory of the tribe. Not all plant foods were consumed directly. Some were ground into flour with heavy stone tools, the seeds of grasses and wild grains pounded into fine powders. In winter, when fuel for fires was precious, this flour could be mixed with melted fat or bone marrow into dense cakes. Compact, high-energy food that traveled well on hunts or migrations. These primitive breads were humble but powerful, turning the humble grass seed into survival fuel. The act of gathering was not without danger. In winter, to leave the safety of shelter in search of roots or nuts meant braving predators, freezing winds, and hidden ice. Yet the rewards were often worth the risk. A basket of cattail roots or a pouch of acorns could feed children when no meat was left. It was not only the hunter's spear that kept the band alive, but also the gatherer's persistence, patience, and knowledge of the land. Anthropologists believe that women's role in gathering may have accounted for the majority of daily calories consumed by bands, especially in harsher winters. While a mammoth hunt might bring abundance, it was uncertain, dangerous, and rare. Roots and nuts, though less glamorous, were steady, dependable, and renewable. They became the unsung heroes of Ice Age survival, the silent counterpart to the noisy spectacle of the hunt. Gathering also encouraged ingenuity in storage. Food caches were dug deep into the earth, where constant temperatures kept nuts and roots safe from freezing or decay. Stones might be placed over caches to deter scavengers. Some groups stored food in cold, dark caves where natural refrigeration preserved it. But this too carried risk. Bears or other predators often sought the same shelters, making every retrieval a gamble. Yet without such caches, famine would come quickly in the depths of winter. Roots and nuts also shaped social rituals. Around the fire, while hunters sharpened spears and repaired tools, others cracked nuts, roasted roots, or ground seeds. These foods were often shared communally, given to children and the elderly first, for their energy was quick and their preparation less demanding than butchering a carcass. In this way, gathered food not only fed bodies but reinforced bonds, reminding everyone that survival was not only about bravery in the hunt, but also patience in the gathering. Imagine a night deep in winter. Outside, snow drifts pile high against the shelter, and the wind moans like a beast across the frozen steppe. Inside, the fire is low, the last scraps of meat gone days ago. A mother reaches into a leather pouch and withdraws a handful of dried berries. She passes them to her children, their faces lighting at the sweet taste, a memory of summer in the heart of winter. Next, she cracks hazelnuts with a stone, sharing their dense energy among the hungry. These are not luxuries. They are lifelines, a fragile thread tying the family to tomorrow. Such moments remind us that survival was not built on hunting alone. It was a tapestry woven from many threads. The spear and the digging stick, the fire and the pouch of nuts, the courage of hunters and the knowledge of gatherers. Without the latter, the former would have failed. Without roots and nuts, even the greatest kill would not carry a group through an entire winter. Over time, this balance shaped the very psychology of early humans. To plan for winter, to gather in summer for a future unseen, was to think ahead, to imagine tomorrow. This foresight, honed through the act of storing food, became one of humanity's defining traits. Animals, too, gather. Squirrels bury nuts. Birds cache seeds. But humans added memory, cooperation, and ritual to the act. They created not just food stores, but cultural practices, stories tied to certain plants, lessons passed down about the right season to gather, the right way to prepare, the dangers of eating the wrong root. Thus, plant foods were not merely supplements, but catalysts of thought, planning, and culture. They required organization, when to gather, where to store, how to distribute. They required patience, waiting for roots to grow, berries to ripen, nuts to fall. They required trust, that others would share in lean times, that food hidden in the earth would not be stolen. And in that trust, in that patience, in that foresight, humanity grew stronger, more resilient, more bound together. In the silence of winter, when meat was scarce and the cold unrelenting, a single handful of nuts or a bundle of dried roots could mean survival. They were small things, humble and quiet, yet they carried weight equal to mammoth hunts and roaring fires. They were proof that survival was not only about strength but about wisdom, not only about courage but about care. In the end, roots, nuts, and gathered foods were not the background to Ice Age life, but its foundation. They were the heartbeat beneath the drama of the hunt, the steady rhythm that carried humanity through winters when death pressed close at every door. And it is in these small, unglamorous acts, digging a root from frozen soil, drying berries in the sun, cracking a nut by firelight, that we see the true genius of survival. For in every humble meal, humanity was not just eating. It was enduring, remembering, and reaching forward into the cold, always toward life. In the frozen silence of the Ice Age winter, few forces matter more to survival than fire. It was warmth against the deadly cold, light against suffocating darkness, and protection against predators that prowled the night. To sit by a fire in the depths of winter was to sit in the center of a fragile universe, where survival flickered with the flames. Without fire, the human body was little more than exposed flesh in a world designed to kill it. With fire, humanity claimed not only life but also a measure of mastery over the elements. For Ice Age people, fire was never taken for granted. It was both a tool and a mystery, a living force that needed feeding, tending, and respect. Many groups may not have always been able to create fire at will. Instead, they guarded embers, carried burning branches from place to place, and rekindled flames with care. A single mistake, letting the fire go out during a storm or losing it on a migration, could spell disaster. Thus, fire was as much a companion as a resource, a presence around which life was organized. The warmth of fire was its most obvious gift. In shelters of hide, bone, or cave stone, fires turned unbearable cold into survivable nights. People huddled close, arranging themselves in circles, elders and children closest to the heat, hunters and young adults keeping the outer edge. The difference between life and death might be measured in inches. Too far from the flames, and frostbite crept in. The fire dried damp hides, thawed frozen meat, and melted snow into drinkable water. Every spark, every flame, was a shield against the merciless winter air. Yet fire was more than warmth. It was also light in a world where winter nights stretched endlessly. The glow of flames pushed back the shadows of caves and forests, creating a circle of safety in an otherwise unknowable dark. Around that light, people told stories, painted images on cave walls, and passed down knowledge from one generation to the next. Fire turned night into time for culture, not just survival. Without it, humans would have been confined to darkness, their lives shortened not only by cold but by silence. Fire was also protection. Predators feared its heat and brightness. Wolves might howl from beyond its glow, but dared not cross into its circle. Cave lions prowled at the edges of the dark, their eyes reflecting firelight. Yet even they hesitated to challenge its blaze. For humans, who were not the strongest or the fastest of Ice Age creatures, this deterrent was revolutionary. It meant sleeping without constant fear of being taken in the night. It meant holding territory not by strength of tooth or claw, but by mastery of flame. Cooking transformed food as well. Raw meat carried parasites, was harder to chew, and less nourishing. Fire unlocked calories, softened roots, and released flavors hidden in plants and animals. Bones could be cracked, marrow roasted, and broths boiled from scraps, making use of every part of a kill. Cooked food meant stronger bodies, fewer illnesses, and more efficient energy. It also meant social gatherings, the sharing of roasted meat, the passing of bowls of hot broth. Fire did not just preserve life, it built community. The technology of fire was itself an art. Flint struck against pyrite could send sparks into dry tinder, igniting bark, moss, or fibers carefully gathered. Some groups may have used friction methods, spinning sticks, or bow drills to generate heat. Yet starting fire was not routine. It was a skill, requiring practice and patience. In many bands, the role of firekeeper may have been sacred, entrusted to those with the knowledge to coax flame from stone or wood. Fire-making tools were treasured, often carried long distances, symbols of survival itself. Once lit, fire had to be maintained. Fuel was always needed, but when it was available, bones and fat when it was not. In treeless tundra, mammoth bones burned slow and hot, their grease sustaining flame through the night. Hunters returned from the field, not only with meat, but with branches, roots, or dung to feed the fire. In winter, gathering fuel was as essential as gathering food. To let the fire dwindle was to invite death. The fire's smoke carried meaning too. Rising from shelters into the cold sky, it signaled life, marking human presence on a landscape. Enemies or rival groups could see it, but so too could friends, families, and future kin. The smell of smoke clung to clothing and hides, a scent that meant safety, warmth, and survival. Over time, fire became entwined with the spiritual imagination of people. Seen as a living entity, a bridge between earth and sky, flesh and spirit. Picture a winter night in a mammoth bone hut. The wind howls outside, rattling the hide walls, snow piling against edges. Inside, the fire burns steady. Around it, a family gathers. Children press close to their mother. Elders tell stories of ancestors. Hunters stretch weary limbs, tools in their hands catching glimmers of firelight. The flicker paints shadows on the walls, turning bones and hides into a shifting theater of survival. Outside, wolves pace, their eyes glinting in the dark, yet none cross the glowing line. Inside, life endures, flame-fed and flame-protected. But fire could also be dangerous. Sparks leaping onto hides could ignite shelters. Flames left untended could die out, or worse, consume food stores. Smoke could choke, poison, or suffocate if a shelter was poorly ventilated. In this sense, fire was both friend and potential foe, powerful, necessary, yet never fully under control. The balance between safety and destruction was as delicate as the flame itself. Despite this danger, fire became the center of human social life. Meals were shared around it, songs and dances performed in its light. Rituals may have honored it, treating it as a gift from spirits or gods. In myths and stories that echoed down millennia, fire was often portrayed as stolen from the divine, wrested from a jealous power to be carried by mortals. Whether or not these tales exist in the Ice Age, the feeling they describe certainly did. Fire was not merely a tool but a wonder, a sacred spark separating humans from the animals they hunted. Ultimately, fire gave humanity more than warmth, light, and protection. It gave time. With fire, nights were no longer dead hours of fear and stillness. They became times for conversation, teaching, dreaming, and planning. By firelight, humans imagined futures, remembered pasts, and shared wisdom. Fire turned survival into culture, transforming a desperate struggle into something richer, something lasting. In the Ice Age, to lose fire was to lose everything. To keep it was to hold the key to life itself. Its flames wove through every aspect of existence, physical, social, and spiritual. It was warmth against the cold, light against the dark, safety against the beasts of night. It was survival, flickering but steadfast, carrying humanity through winters that might otherwise have erased it from the earth. In the unforgiving winters of the Ice Age, survival was never an individual task. It was a collective effort, woven together by the bonds of family and community. No single hunter, no lone mother, no isolated elder could withstand the relentless cold and hunger alone. It was within the warmth of social ties, as much as the warmth of fire, that prehistoric people found their strength. The harsh climate did not merely shape their shelters or their tools. It shaped the very fabric of their relationships, binding people together in ways both practical and emotional. Family was a core unit of survival. Around the fire, small groups, perhaps 20 or 40 people, formed what anthropologists call bands. These bands were usually composed of extended kin, parents, children, grandparents, cousins, and in-laws united by marriage and blood ties. But survival demanded flexibility. Outsiders could be adopted, new members welcomed, bonds redefined when necessary. Trust was paramount. In a world where food was scarce and nights were deadly cold, betrayal could destroy an entire group, while cooperation ensured life. Within the family unit, roles were both defined and shared. Elders held knowledge of seasons, migration routes, and survival techniques, acting as living libraries of memory. They might no longer hunt or gather with the vigor of youth, but their wisdom guided decisions. Mothers tended to children, nursed infants, and maintained domestic order within shelters, ensuring warmth and food were distributed. Hunters, often younger adults, risked the dangers of the field, while adolescents learned by watching, helping, and slowly taking on greater responsibilities. Children, though vulnerable, were also vital. They were the future, the reason communities endured through struggle. Their laughter and play, even in snow-covered shelters, carried hope. Cooperation extended far beyond mere survival tasks. Food, once brought back from a successful hunt, was shared communally. A mammoth or bison could never be consumed by a single family. It was divided among the group, strengthening bonds and reducing jealousy or conflict. Even in scarcity, the ethic of sharing was central. Those who hoarded or refused to contribute risked social punishment, perhaps even expulsion. To be alone in winter was to be sentenced to death. Thus, generosity was more than virtue. It was law, enforced by necessity. Winter deepened these bonds. In long nights, families gathered close in shelters, not just for warmth but for connection. Storytelling thrived here. Myths of creation, tales of ancestors, lessons hidden within parables. All were passed down by firelight. These stories were not idle entertainment. They carried practical wisdom about animal behavior, weather patterns, or moral codes. Through narrative, knowledge survived as surely as the people themselves. In this way, community memory became as vital as food or fire. Rituals reinforced unity. The act of sharing meals, of placing bones into the fire, or of singing together in the dark, created collective meaning. Certain ceremonies may have marked births, deaths, or seasonal changes. In times of grief, the community mourned as one. In times of joy, they celebrated together. Even small gestures, the comforting hand of an elder on a child's shoulder, the exchange of beads or ornaments as gifts, served to tighten the weave of human connection. Yet these bonds were tested constantly by stress. Scarcity bred tension. If the hunt failed or food ran low, resentment simmered. Conflicts over distribution could erupt. Anthropologists suggest that leadership in these bands was often fluid. Not a single ruler, but consensus, with skilled hunters, wise elders, or charismatic storytellers holding influence at different times. Leadership was earned through trust, not imposed by force. Disputes might be resolved through mediation or by one family leaving to join another band. Flexibility was survival. Children were raised not by parents alone, but by the group. Older siblings cared for younger ones. Grandparents taught skills. Uncles and aunts acted as protectors. This cooperative care ensured no child was left vulnerable, even if a parent fell ill or died. It also gave children exposure to multiple teachers, building resilience and adaptability. Their earliest lessons, how to light tinder, how to spot animal tracks, how to stitch a hide, were infused with patience and repetition, preparing them for adult life in an unforgiving climate. The psychological weight of winter must not be underestimated. Endless cold, hunger, and darkness wore down the spirit. Here, too, social life provided resilience. Joking, games, and music helped to lift morale. Archaeological finds of simple flutes made from bird bones suggest that music was a communal balm, uniting people through rhythm and song. Play, even among adults, helped to relieve stress, keeping despair at bay. A laugh shared in the middle of a blizzard might not change the weather, but it could change the will to endure it. Romantic and marital bonds carried special weight. Pairing was not only about affection, but about alliances. A marriage between individuals could link families, strengthen trade between groups, or secure peace. Within these bonds, intimacy offered both emotional comfort and practical collaboration. Couples relied on one another to share burdens, care for children, and support survival. Love, partnership, and necessity were tightly interwoven. Beyond individual families, networks of bands created a broader social fabric. During certain times of year, multiple groups might gather, exchanging goods, stories, and even mates. These gatherings broke the monotony of isolation and provided opportunities for trade. Hides for flint, meat for ornaments. They also reinforced a sense that even in the vast, frozen wilderness, people were not entirely alone. Kinship could stretch across valleys and rivers, creating webs of support that extended survival beyond a single fire circle. Spiritual life, too, was interlaced with family bonds. Ancestors were remembered, their spirits invoked in times of hardship. Some shelters contained carefully placed bones, beads, or carvings, suggesting rituals of remembrance. To honor the dead was also to teach the living, to remind them that survival was not just individual but generational, that today's endurance was tomorrow's legacy. Families carried not only bloodlines but stories, songs, and symbols, intangible inheritances as essential as tools or weapons. Imagine a winter night in a cramped hut of hides and bones. Outside, snow buries the land. Inside, a mother rocks her child by the fire, while an elder carves a piece of bone into a bead. A hunter returns, frost in his beard, laying down what little food he has managed to catch. The group eats sparingly, each taking their share, no one forgotten. Later, a story is told of a great ancestor who once faced a winter just as harsh and survived by courage and wit. As the fire flickers, young eyes widen, absorbing both the tale and the lesson. Survival is never solitary. It is woven in bonds, in family, in the strength of many hands holding together. In the end, it was not only tools, shelters, or fire that ensured human survival in the Ice Age winters. It was a fabric of social life, the trust of family, the wisdom of elders, the laughter of children, and the rituals that bound them all together. Without these ties, humanity might have fractured and vanished. With them, it endured, carrying not just bodies but hearts through the cold. The warmth of fire may have kept flesh alive, but it was the warmth of family and community that kept the human spirit from freezing. In the deep cold of Ice Age winters, when nights stretched endlessly and storms howled across the frozen plains, the human mind reached beyond the material world. Fire, food, and shelter kept the body alive, but the spirit needed something more: explanations, meaning, and connection. For early humans, the world was alive with unseen forces. The cold was not just weather. It was a spirit to be feared or appeased. The hunt was not just chance. It was a pact with animal souls. Death was not just an ending. It was a transition into another realm. Beliefs and rituals became survival tools as essential as spears or hides, guiding people through the darkest winters with a sense of order in the chaos. Evidence carved into bone, painted on cave walls, and buried with the dead suggests that Ice Age spirituality was rich, complex, and deeply tied to the cycles of nature. Winter intensified these beliefs. When the sun disappeared for days or weeks, people looked for ways to explain its absence and prayed for its return. Ritual fires may have symbolized the rebirth of light. Certain animals, like reindeer or mammoth, may have been revered as sacred beings, their spirits honored after the hunt. The cold season was a reminder of humanity's fragility, and ritual gave people the strength to endure. Rituals often centered around fire. Beyond its physical warmth, fire carried symbolic meaning, a spark of life in the midst of deathly cold. Offerings may have been cast into flames, bones, fat, or fragments of food, gifts to the unseen forces that govern survival. Flames licking upward were perhaps imagined as a bridge between the earth and the sky, carrying prayers into beyond. In many traditions recorded thousands of years later, fire held sacred significance, and it is likely that its reverence began much earlier in those Ice Age winters. The hunt itself was not only a physical act, but also a spiritual negotiation. Hunters may have performed rituals before leaving, painting their bodies, chanting, or carrying charms carved from bone and ivory. After a kill, ceremonies could follow, painting blood on tools, arranging bones in specific patterns, or speaking words of thanks to the animal spirit. To take life was never done lightly. It was bound up in reciprocity, the belief that animals gave themselves to hunters, but only if honored properly, may have been widespread. Winter, when every hunt could mean life or starvation, amplified the importance of these rites. Burials offer further clues. Across Ice Age Europe and Asia, archaeologists have found graves lined with ochre, decorated with beads, or furnished with tools and ornaments. Some children were buried with thousands of beads sewn into clothing, an enormous investment of time and labor, suggesting not only grief but reverence. Such practices point to a belief that the dead continued in another existence, one where these offerings would be useful. Winter, when death stalked more closely, must have made these rituals frequent and profoundly meaningful. Each burial was not only a farewell, but also a reaffirmation that life and spirit continue beyond the snow. Caves, dark and echoing, were also places of spiritual activity. Their walls carried paintings of bison, horses, lions, and abstract symbols, often hidden in chambers far from natural light. These images may have been part of rituals meant to ensure hunting success, fertility, or the turning of seasons. In the silence of winter, with the wind screaming outside, descending into a cave to paint by torchlight would have been a powerful, transformative act. It turned cold rock into sacred space, a place where humans reach for contact with the unseen. Music and rhythm played roles too. Flutes made from bird bones, rattles carved from antlers, and drums of stretched hide may have filled shelters during rituals. Sound had carried people into trance, binding communities together in shared experience. Dancing around fire, stamping feet in rhythm, chanting into the night. These were not diversions but acts of survival, lifting spirits, reinforcing unity, and connecting to powers beyond the human world. Winter's despair was held at bay by sound, movement, and belief. The cycles of the moon and stars may also have guided ritual life. In the long darkness, the heavens became maps of time and symbols of order. Certain constellations may have been linked to migration routes or animal behaviors. Watching the night sky while huddled in a frozen camp, early humans might have read stories in the stars, using them to explain both the world around them and their place within it. These celestial patterns could have provided reassurance, proof that even in the harshest winters, the cosmos remained steady. Winter rituals likely included acts of renewal. Just as modern societies hold midwinter festivals of light, early humans may have celebrated the turning point of the season, when the sun began to return. Fires lit on high ground, gatherings of multiple bands, or the sharing of scarce food and feasts could all have marked these transitions. Such celebrations reinforce hope, reminding communities that winter, however harsh, was temporary, and spring would come again. Spiritual specialists, shamans, or ritual leaders may have played a vital role in these practices. They were the interpreters of dreams, the healers of illness, and the mediators between human and spirit worlds. Dressed in animal skins, adorned with beads or antlers, they may have entered trances induced by drumming, chanting, or herbs. In these altered states, they sought guidance, healing, or blessing for the group. During winter, when sickness struck or food failed, the shaman's role became especially critical. Their presence offered not only hope, but also psychological strength to endure hardship. Belief also extended to objects. Amulets carved from mammoth ivory, pendants shaped like animals, or beads strung into necklaces may have been worn as protective charms. Each piece carried symbolic meaning: fertility, strength, luck in the hunt, or protection from spirits of illness and cold. These talismans were small anchors of security in a vast, unpredictable world. In the frozen months, when danger was constant, their importance grew. At the heart of all these rituals and beliefs was the human need to impose meaning on suffering. The cold, the hunger, the deaths of loved ones. None of these would be endured if they were meaningless. By weaving them into a spiritual framework, Ice Age people transformed despair into purpose. The harshness of winter became a test of spirit, a cycle ordained by forces larger than themselves, survivable through respect, ritual, and faith. Imagine a midwinter night. A band gathers in a cave, torches casting trembling light on painted walls. A shaman in fur and bone mask begins a chant, echoed by others. The sound rises, filling the cavern with rhythm. A child clutches a carved amulet, believing it holds the spirit of a reindeer. An elder throws fat into the fire, the flames leaping higher, shadows dancing like spirits on stone. Outside, the wind roars, snow drifts higher, predators prowl unseen. But inside, within the circle of fire and faith, humans endure, not just as bodies fighting cold, but as spirits bound together, certain that they belong to something greater than the storm. In the end, beliefs and rituals were not luxuries. They were survival. They gave comfort to the grieving, courage to the fearful, and unity to the group. They offered explanations for the inexplicable and hope in the darkest nights. While tools, fire, and shelters guarded the body, the spirit world of winter guarded the soul. And without the soul's endurance, the body would not have survived at all. Winter was not always a season of stillness. For many prehistoric groups, survival demanded movement, even when the land was locked in ice and the air stung with frost. Food sources shifted, herds of animals migrated, and some regions became too cold or barren to sustain life. To remain in one place for too long could mean starvation. And so, despite the dangers, early humans set out across frozen rivers, snow-laden forests, and wind-swept plains, undertaking journeys that tested the limits of body and spirit. These migrations were rarely random. Over generations, families memorized the movement of animals. The reindeer sweeping south, the mammoth seeking shelter in valleys, the bison shifting toward grasslands where snow lay thinner. Following these patterns was a rhythm of survival, a seasonal pulse that dictated when to move and when to stay. To travel in winter was to gamble with exhaustion, frostbite, and death, but to stay behind was often worse. The Ice Age forced humanity into motion, teaching them that endurance meant adaptability. Journeys required preparation. Before departure, bands gathered food, dried meat, and rendered fat into portable cakes of energy. Skins and hides were stitched into warm clothing, layered for insulation. Sleds fashioned from wood, bone, or even drag hides carried loads of tools and supplies. Children and the sick were bundled tightly, sometimes placed on travois pulled by humans, or, in later times, by domesticated animals like dogs. Fires were preserved, embers carried in bark containers or horn vessels, smoldering through the day to be rekindled at night. Every detail mattered, for mistakes could cost lives on the open steppe. The landscapes they crossed were as breathtaking as they were deadly. Vast tundras stretched white and endless, broken only by the silhouettes of mammoth herds in the distance. Frozen rivers served as natural highways, their smooth surfaces easier to traverse than snowdrifts, though treacherous with cracks and thin ice. Mountains pose even greater challenges. Their passes choked with snow, avalanches waiting to thunder down at the slightest sound. Forests, dense and shadowed, provided some shelter but also concealed predators and made travel slow. Each terrain brought its own threats, demanding knowledge, strategy, and cooperation. Along the way, danger was constant. Blizzards could descend without warning, erasing landmarks and trapping groups in whiteout conditions where even direction was lost. Temperatures could plunge to extremes, freezing exposed flesh within minutes. Wolves trailed from the shadows, testing the group's strength, while cave lions or bears might strike at camps if hunger drove them near. For travelers, rest was brief and often precarious. Shelters of snow, branches, or hides were erected quickly, fires kindled with urgency, meals eaten sparingly before the march continued. Movement was both necessity and torment, but migration was not only hardship. It also carried moments of beauty and awe. Imagine standing beneath a winter sky clear of clouds, the Milky Way blazing across the heavens, auroras rippling green and red in the silence, the crunch of snow underfoot, the breath of companions steaming in the cold, the distant silhouettes of animals moving against the horizon. These were the experiences that stitched themselves into memory and myth. Journeys were not merely physical trials, but spiritual passages, weaving humans into the vast, living landscape. Social bonds were tested and reinforced during migration. Strong hunters carried more weight. Elders guided with knowledge of routes. Mothers comforted children through storms. Cooperation was everything. If someone faltered, the group decided whether to slow for them or leave them behind. Choices that could spark grief or conflict. Yet often, compassion outweighed cold logic. Stories tell us that Ice Age people cared for the injured, even the disabled, suggesting that community was stronger than mere efficiency. To survive migration, humans needed not only strength but loyalty and love. Migration also brought contact with other groups. Sometimes this meant welcome, sharing shelters, trading tools or ornaments, joining forces for large hunts. At other times, it meant competition over resources, leading to conflict. Winter sharpened these encounters, for scarcity made every carcass, every cache of nuts, every stretch of land more valuable. Bands might clash violently, or they might weave alliances through marriage or gift-giving. The pathways carved by winter migrations were not only physical trails, but also social networks, shaping the flow of human culture across continents. Journeys left traces in the archaeological record. Hearts appear in caves far from permanent settlements, suggesting temporary camps. Stone tools made from distant quarries show that people carried knowledge of landscapes far beyond their immediate home. Ornaments of seashells have been found hundreds of miles inland, proof of trade or travel across great distances. Even human remains, found in caves high in mountains or buried in steppe soil, tell stories of movement, of people who did not stay in one place but carried their lives across vast territories. Winter travel required innovation. Snowshoes made from bent wood and sinew may have eased movement across deep drifts. Simple sleds, pulled by groups working together, carried heavy loads. In regions where dogs were domesticated, they may have assisted in hauling supplies. People learned to read the land, watching the way wind carved snow into ridges, following animal tracks across frozen ground, or using stars to guide direction. These skills turned the seemingly impossible task of migration into an achievable, though perilous, act of survival. Imagine a band of families on the move. The wind lashes at their faces as they trudge across a frozen plain, hides pulled tightly around their bodies. Children cling to sleds, their eyes wide with fatigue and wonder. Hunters walk at the edges, scanning for danger, spears at the ready. In the distance, a herd of reindeer moves south, their hooves breaking through the snow. The humans follow, not just as predators, but as shadows bound to the rhythms of the wild. At night, they huddle around a fire in a makeshift camp, sparks rising to the star-filled sky, carrying their breath, their prayers, and their hope into the vast dark. Migration was not always a choice, but it was always transformative. It tested endurance, shaped communities, and spread humanity across continents. Every winter journey carried risk, but also carried possibility. The chance to find food, to discover new lands, to connect with others. Over time, these movements carved the pathways of human history, linking distant valleys, mountains, and plains into a web of survival. In the end, winter travel was both peril and promise. It was a reminder that humans were never static, never rooted to a single place, but beings of movement, adaptation, and courage. The frozen world forced them onto the road, but it also gave them the strength to endure. With every step across ice and snow, humanity expanded its horizons, proving that even in the harshest winters, the will to survive was stronger than the storm. An act of defiance, proof that survival was not left to chance but to determination. In this, we see the roots of human ingenuity, the ability to confront the impossible and bend it toward survival. Another lesson is the power of community. Alone, a person in the Ice Age winter stood little chance. Together, bands became resilient units of survival. Fires were shared, food was divided, and knowledge was passed down. The sick and injured were cared for, not abandoned, a striking sign of empathy even in times of scarcity. Migration itself was a collective effort, requiring cooperation and sacrifice. These acts remind us that the human story has always been communal, not individual. Survival was never only about the strongest, but about those who can inspire loyalty, share burdens, and keep hope alive in the darkest nights. Winter also taught adaptability. Ice Age people were not locked into a single way of life. They shifted strategies as the seasons demanded. In the summer, they followed herds across green plains. In the winter, they huddled in caves or moved toward milder regions. They learned to read the sky, the snow, and the tracks of animals, adjusting plans as conditions changed. This adaptability was not just physical but cultural. Rituals evolved, stories were retold, and technologies refined. In facing winter, humans learned flexibility, a trait that allowed them to thrive in every corner of the globe. There is also a lesson in respect for nature. Prehistoric people understood that they were part of the environment, not masters of it. They did not wage war against winter. They worked with its rhythms. Animals were hunted, but sparingly, and every part of the kill was used: meat for food, hides for clothing, bones for tools. Fires were sacred, treated as gifts rather than conveniences. Even the stars and storms were woven into myths that gave meaning to natural forces. In these attitudes lies a reminder that survival comes not from conquering the world, but from respecting it. Winter shaped not only survival, but imagination. Around fires, humans told stories of spirits, ancestors, and gods that explained the harsh season and gave comfort in the face of the unknown. They carved figurines, painted animals on cave walls, and created rituals that celebrated the turning of seasons. These were not luxuries. They were survival tools for the mind. By weaving meaning into hardship, people found strength to endure. In this, we see the beginnings of art, religion, and culture itself, born, in part, from long nights of cold and darkness. When we compare our lives today with those of Ice Age winters, the contrast is stark. Modern humans live in insulated homes, with electricity, central heating, and supermarkets stocked year-round. Winter, for many, is no longer a threat but a season of comfort, holidays, warm drinks, and quiet snowfall viewed from safe windows. Yet beneath this comfort, the lessons of prehistory remain relevant. Climate still challenges us, resources still demand careful use, and community still determines our resilience in crisis. The story of prehistoric winters is not only about the past, but about the foundations of who we are. Consider how innovation born of necessity still drives us. Just as our ancestors discovered new ways to trap warmth or preserve food, we continue to innovate in response to modern challenges, from renewable energy to disaster preparedness. The same spirit that once sparked a fire in a frozen cave fuels our creativity today. Prehistoric winters remind us that human survival has always been linked to invention, and that every hardship carries the seed of a breakthrough. Equally important is the reminder of humility. The Ice Age made clear that humans were small against the forces of nature. Storms, predators, and hunger all humbled them, yet they endured. In our modern age, with technology at our fingertips, it is easy to believe we have mastered the environment. But as natural disasters, climate change, and shifting weather patterns remind us, nature still holds power. To respect it, to adapt with it, is a wisdom our ancestors knew deeply. Winter also reveals the endurance of hope. For months, Ice Age people lived in cold darkness, yet they believed spring would return. Their stories, their rituals, even their survival strategies all revolved around the cycle of the seasons. Hope was not abstract, but embodied in every act of preparation, every ember carried on migration, every child wrapped tightly against the cold. Hope was as vital as food or fire, the invisible force that kept humanity alive. In this lies perhaps the most timeless lesson, that survival requires not only physical strength, but belief in a future beyond the storm. In a way, the prehistoric winter can be seen as humanity's greatest teacher. It demanded endurance, forced cooperation, and inspired imagination. It stripped life to its essentials, making every choice matter. And through it, humans emerged not only as survivors, but as thinkers, creators, and dreamers. The Ice Age winter was not just an obstacle. It was a forge, shaping the human spirit in ways that echo across millennia. Today, when we look back at those long nights and frozen landscapes, we are not just studying history. We are looking into the foundation of ourselves. The fires they lit are the fires we still carry, the spark of creativity, the warmth of community, the light of hope. Their struggles are reminders of what it means to be human, vulnerable yet resourceful, small in the face of nature yet boundless in imagination. And so, the story of prehistoric winters ends not in despair, but in triumph. Against odds that seemed insurmountable, our ancestors walked through the snow and into the future. Every footprint in the ice, every campfire flickering in a cave, every child born in the midst of winter was a declaration that humanity would endure. We inherit that legacy. The next time we feel the chill of winter on our skin, we can remember those who came before, the ones who turned survival into culture, hardship into strength, and cold darkness into the spark of human history.